task on our hands, and we are privileged to have distinguished individuals that I believe, and I'm sure that you would agree with me by the end of the entire program, that are going to do justice to the subject that we have at hand. So how will Ghana's 17th IMF program impact investment in agricultural and manufacturing sector? Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my name is Samuel Ajiman, and I'm going to start with Professor Bopkin on this subject. If you can just give us your preliminary take on this.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. All protocol observed. I also want to thank GIZ for providing the funding for this dialogue series, which has also enhanced my perspective on our economy for the years that I've been part of this reform dialogue. I've learned a lot, and I want to say I'm very grateful to GIZ and then IMANI. It's interesting that the subject matter this afternoon has to do with another IMF program. And if we say it will not be the last one, it's not like we don't like this country, but it's simply because we've had enough evidence to support that we have been successful at doing the things that take us to the fund. In the time past, it was taking us 4 years. Now we are shortening that. The last time Ghana got support from the IMF was in April 2020. The last fund-supported program was actually April 2019. And Mr. Kujo, if you remember, at the end of the 16th IMF program, we had a forum at IMANI to look at the 16th IMF program comprehensively. And we concluded that it is not the question of whether Ghana will go there again or not, but it's the question of when. At the end of that forum, the conclusion was that if Ghana was going to do all the reforms, outstanding reforms, measures under the program, and will commit to greater fiscal discipline, then there will be no need for Ghana to return to the IMF. Some of the policies that were, or measures that were announced included setting up a fiscal council. Then when the government was in opposition, they said the fiscal council was going to be independent, and a number of other reforms. But we failed to act. The fundamentals of the economy actually started deteriorating, as we are all told, before COVID came. Even if COVID made its headquarters in Ghana, we provided a context. The results of that is that because of low resilience of our economy, we succumb to the pressure and the shocks. Whilst we are towards the end of August and we are talking about IMF program, it was our considered view that the optimal time for Ghana to have made the application was last year. If we had done, probably by now a program would have been concluded. The delay is costing us and is creating a bigger hole now. What gets sacrificed in all of this has been critical investment in the growth enhancing areas that should move us out of poverty. The neglect or the culprit has been agriculture, agribusiness, and manufacturing. In 2003, Ghana signed on to the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, which among other things required that we commit to at least 10% in terms of budgetary allocation to that sector. And among other things, investment in technology, infrastructure, and all of that, that was supposed to give us a minimum growth of 6%. Ghana could not keep to that. In fact, studies by Oxfam between 2010 and 2015 indicated that Ghana was one of the least committed countries to narrowing inequality through agriculture. The highest was Mali, that committed averagely 11% of their budget to agriculture, followed by Burkina Faso, 10.3%, and then Niger, 9.8%. Probably it will not be strange If you get to know that Ghana was importing tomatoes from a desert country, Burkina Faso, there is a reason. The least committed ones, you find Ghana at the bottom, below 3%. Of course, our neighbors, we are not neighbors for nothing. Nigeria, 2.8%. Cote d'Ivoire, in terms of agriculture, 3.6%. The reason this subject matter is important is that if you look at the growing unemployment, the inequality reducing effect of agriculture is the highest. Our job creation capacity rests with agriculture and agribusiness. Studies have shown that if we boost agricultural output by $1 million, it will create along its path 750 jobs. That's the data. From the Ghana Statistical Service, within what we call the social accounting metrics, with the exception of output, agriculture has the highest multiplier effect when it comes to employment and then income. Again, agriculture has the highest inequality reducing effect with an index of negative 0.41. If you have this data and we are driven by the data, then it means that we are in a position actually to bring inclusive growth and be able to feed ourselves. And why we could have made agriculture the backbone of this economy, the evidence is clear. The net food import of Africa in 2015 was $35 billion. This is how the business community reacts to data. And this was projected to reach $110 billion by 2025. That meant that that's a huge market for Ghana to take advantage of, particularly within the framework of the African Continental Free Trade. Of course, if you don't make the required investment, and the nature of the sector, agriculture, agribusiness, link that to manufacturing is such that without adequate funding from the public sector, from the state, it's very difficult to leave all of that to the private sector to fund in terms of critical infrastructure and also in terms of their business model, even if they look at it from the net present value or so. But now that we are under an IMF, or we are going for an IMF program, actually, the future rests with us because the IMF will not impose a program on us. We are going to develop the program ourselves. So this is the best time to make the right input into whatever program that will be developed, focusing on agriculture, agribusiness, and manufacturing. The reason I see accommodating perspective from the fund is that, unlike the IMF of old, the IMF of today is much concerned about inequality. It's much concerned about unemployment. So because the issue of inequality, the issue of climate change, and the rest of them have assumed some level of macro criticality, for which reason in the IMF's own macro framework of doing things, they value them. So any program that involves significant funding to agriculture, agribusiness, and manufacturing, I think can be accommodated. It depends on how we rationalize our expenditure along these lines and also create the right environment for private sector to complement the public sector investment in that area. For the private sector, they want stable environment. Macroeconomic stability, as the Vice President once said, that macroeconomic stability is like fresh air. You deny anybody fresh air, they're going to have challenges. And we have not been able to guarantee macroeconomic stability for a long time, which would enable the private sector to be able to leverage on. There are two schools of thought about this. There are those who think that macroeconomic stability is a condition precedent to economic transformation. That before you can talk about socio-economic transformation, you need to guarantee macroeconomic stability. And to do so, you need its persistence is also important. But as you read from the background concept, that since 1992, we've not been able to guarantee macroeconomic stability consistently over a long period of time, from which we can transform this economy by making the right decisions. What have we seen? What we have observed since 1992 in this country has to do with a period of relative macroeconomic stability informed by sensible fiscal policy, backed up by sound monetary policy only in between elections. Then, in all the competitive elections that we've had, we then messed up the macro variables because the goal then is about winning the election, and then we undermine the fundamentals of the economy. Election-related fiscal deficit has averaged more than 4% in all the major competitive elections that we have seen. The reality is that election-related excesses do not go to the productive sectors of the economy. So once we are done with the election, then that excess injection of liquidity will cause inflationary pressures to head up. And therefore, we then use the next 1 or 2 years to restore macroeconomic stability, and then the next election shows up. So we've been going in circle. When it happens that way, it's very difficult for private sector to plan. We've had instances in this country because of macroeconomic instability. Average lending in Ghana's financial market was around 12 months. That type of lending does not support agriculture. That type of lending does not support manufacturing. That type of lending only supports import. So the type of credit that was available could only fund import. You import maximum 6 months, you are able to turn it around. Go and pay down your debt and your principal. But the average turnaround in the manufacturing sector is 2 to 3 years. In the agriculture sector, it's a little longer than that. So if you have a type of funding with a maturity of 12 months, and the average turnaround in terms of the investment side is 2 to 3 years, if you go for that type of funding, you're going to run into maturity mismatch, meaning that your financing will mature, your asset side wouldn't have matured. If it happens that way, people would abandon production, value addition, agriculture, and then would all go into import. And you can see that all over the place in this country. The successful entrepreneurs who talk on radio and we listen to them, all that they do is to import. The good number of the manufacturing firms in this country, a good number of them actually import the item and add a local logo on it. So the manufacturing actually doesn't take place here. So when it comes to the value addition where job creation can come, we have actually outsourced that. The results of that, if we see greater unemployment, if we see challenges, inequality, and the rest of that, we could not blame anybody else because this is essentially within our control. It's simply because over the years, we have failed to do the needful. Probably I will end here, and then I'll come back later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bopkin. Professor Bopkin, you may have to take the first one as we end this last round.
Okay, thank you very much. There's one thing that is clear to me, having listened to the conversation from the table, that the country needs some kind of a national consensus building around the IMF program with the key stakeholders at the table. That is a must. And that is also good for building ownership, which will be key for successful implementation of whatever program that is agreed. Because we know in this country that negative sentiment around IMF program have fueled change of regime in this country. In 1972, so it's important that the government recognizes the sentiment around the table and begin to build consensus as to what the country should be having with the IMF, with input from the major stakeholders. And as we said, it is not possible that everybody's voice perhaps will be accommodated, but we need that. I think we did that in 2014, right from Royal Senchi, and all of that, which in itself fed into the IMF program. And then to answer your question, what I know is that government hasn't presented any program to the fund as we speak. I know that they are working seriously on it. I am aware they have consulted a few think tanks and civil society here and there, but that is essentially not the kind of consensus building we are asking for. Perhaps government needs to engage and be more open. They can develop the program in secret, but when it is approved, we will have a copy. We will have a copy because we will be monitoring it. And if they present it, we will get a copy. So it's better that they get the inputs of Ghanaians and build consensus and ownership in that program. Because whether we like it or not, fiscal adjustment in the short term would impose cost on all of us. For the state to balance its books, they will probably have to take from you and I and private sector in order to balance the books at the macro level. So that kind of adjustment that we need to make, it requires that we get everybody along. Then also the other thing is that going to the IMF is not in contravention of the Ghana Beyond Aid. The Ghana Beyond Aid document is not anti-aid or aid rejection. It's to align aid. So we've been talking about Ghana Beyond Aid as though it suggests that we don't need aid or whatever. It's actually to align aid. And if you look at the projections in the Ghana Beyond Aid, it actually tells you that the country is in need of more aid.
Maybe right. what was communicated is different from what the document suggests.
Yeah, so I mean, as an academic, I've read the document and all of that, so perhaps we can position that. What we can do, and I agree with the comment from here, we have lost the fresh air. We are hoping that through the IMF program, we can get that fresh air, which we call macroeconomic stability. What we need to do is to build on that. How do we use that as a stepping stone, right, in order to ensure greater socio-economic transformation? And I believe that is where, and we must monitor, we must hold our own government accountable. And I believe that this was clearly avoidable, but it will be surprising to go into an IMF program with the kind of governance size that we have. And I will talk about that. Look, Côte d'Ivoire, you just mentioned how the percentage they spend, right? And the efficiency. So it's a combination of spending and efficiency. Côte d'Ivoire in April 2022 took a decision to reduce the number of ministers from 41 to 32, our neighbors. What is so unique about Ghana that size matters that much, right? So in times like this, we are looking at a lean government as the best response in getting out of this situation. And if you check the spending on the ministries and ministers and the rest of them, if we take a decision to reduce the number of ministers to below 60 and number of ministries to about 20, Ghana annually will save more than 1.5 billion cedis. If you look at that cumulatively, it's more than offset how much we need on free senior high school. You know, if you look at the way we have commercialized and monetized our democracy, it's very difficult. It's like asking fish to climb a tree if you want the democratic dividend to trickle down to the ordinary Ghanaian or the electorates. So let's, beyond what we'll get from the IMF, how do we leverage on this to ensure that the expensive nature by which we have operationalized our democracy is dealt with? I will tell you something. Imani, others have done that. That this country loses annually $3 billion through corruption. $3 billion. Assuming you assuming you hold all the other factors constant in terms of related benefit from the IMF, that is more than what we could get from the IMF. Maximum we could get from the IMF, either we choose the extended credit facility or extended fund facility, maximum $3 billion. We're actually losing that in a year. And what
through corruption.
What we'll get from the IMF, probably spread it over 3 years. That is not the only thing. Illegal fishing, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, we lose more than 1 billion cedis. Trade misinvoicing, Ghana loses more than $2 billion annually. So if you look at the leakages in all of this, so when we say Ghana loses this, that is not to suggest that it goes to the sea. These are traceable to individual pockets in the system. And that is why the incentive to hold to the status quo is high, because there are those who benefit from it. You want to solve, look at what the special prosecutor has been fighting, right, and all of that. I hope he doesn't fail just to preserve his life. You understand that? And all that. So this country, we have created, presided over, and supervised a system that benefits vested interest to the neglect of the majority. And that is why government has always been uncomfortable. Look, government itself was far uncomfortable going to the fund than Mr.
Karawa.
Yeah. You know why? Because of the extra, you know, you don't need to do anything to darkness. You just need to shine light. And you see how uncomfortable darkness will be. But this is the problem. Ghana's problem goes beyond IMF. And I'll tell you why. Anytime we have been under an IMF program, elections is unable, elections is bigger than IMF. That's the point I'm making. So under the competitive elections that we've had IMF program, we throw the program away. 2016, you can look at what happened. We were under an IMF program, right? Look at what happened. You can check other periods. And the reason is simple. Even when we were not during an election, this is what we did. Because government couldn't accommodate its excessive spending through the usual central budget deficit accumulation, they do so through state-owned enterprises.
Okay.
Right? And accumulate losses from there. And later it comes back to bite us.
Okay.
This is the Ghana we are talking about.
Thank you, Prof. I think that you've done justice to the question that was